My boss said I'd never make manager. 2 years later, I'm CEO, and he's begging to keep his job. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and dry erase marker, and I could hear the old HVAC unit clicking like it was trying to decide whether to live. Greg stood at the head of the table with a laser pointer in his hand, one of those guys who loves holding tools because it makes him feel important, and he angled his body so everyone could see him and not me. On the screen behind him was a slide titled FY Roadmap, Leadership Alignment, and my name was on it in a tiny box under Individual Contributor Track. He smiled like he was about to do me a favor. "We're going to be realistic here," he said, voice smooth, eyes locked on mine. "Some people are built for execution, not management." He flicked the pointer in my box. "You're valuable, but you're not manager material. You'll never make manager. So let's stop pretending." My palms went sweaty under the table. I could feel my pulse in my throat. There were 7 other people in the room, all carefully neutral, all pretending not to watch my face. My coworker Nina's foot brushed my ankle. One of those small, silent gestures that says, "I saw that. I'm here." I stared at Greg and tried to make my voice come out normal. "Can you explain what not manager material means?" I asked because I needed him to say it, out loud. Greg's smile tightened like I'd forced him to show his teeth. "It means you're intense," he said, and he let that hang like it was a diagnosis. "You challenge too much. You don't always fit the culture." He finally looked away, like he'd delivered truth and didn't want to see the impact. The marker squeaked when he capped it. My mouth tasted metallic. I nodded once, slow, and wrote something in my notebook with a pen that was shaking slightly. Not because I agreed, because I wanted the moment pinned down in ink, so I didn't gaslight myself later. It was a Tuesday night 2 years earlier when I realized Greg wasn't just a bad boss. He was actively threatened by me. I was a senior analyst at a mid-sized logistics software company called Harrogate Systems, the kind of place that loves words like family and grit while quietly expecting you to answer Slack at midnight. I'd been there 3 years. I was good at my job in the boring ways that actually matter. I caught errors before they became fires. I built dashboards people actually used. I documented processes so new hires didn't drown. I handled angry customer escalations without lighting anyone on fire. And I did it without needing applause, which is probably why Greg hated me. He loved people who performed loyalty. I just worked. That Tuesday, we were doing one of those late war room calls because a major client's shipments were getting misrouted and their VP was threatening to pull the contract. Greg was on the call, sounding busy and important, tossing around vague directions like "let's align" and "we need ownership." Meanwhile, I had 3 browser tabs open, 1 SQL query running, and a notepad full of timestamps. The issue wasn't a mapping table. Someone had pushed a change without updating a dependent service, and our routing logic was defaulting to an old depot code. It was fixable, not instantly, but fixable. I explained it clearly. We can patch the mapping table in the next hour, but we should also roll back the deployment and add validation so this can't happen again. Greg interrupted. "That's too technical," he said, loud enough that the client could hear. "Let's not overwhelm them." The client VP went quiet in that tense way executives go quiet right before they explode. I said, carefully, "They deserve to know what happened." Greg laughed, actually laughed like I was adorable. "You're not on a leadership team," he said. "Let me handle client comms." I watched the client's face on Zoom stiffen. I watched my own screen light up with Slack messages from the engineering lead. "She's right, it's the mapping table." Greg ignored it because it didn't fit his narrative of being the smartest voice in the room. So I did something Greg never forgave me for. I spoke anyway. I said calm, "We found the source. It's a routing table misalignment after today's deployment. We're patching it now and rolling back within the hour. You'll have a full incident report tomorrow with prevention steps." The client VP exhaled and said, "Thank you," and I could almost feel Greg's anger through my headphones. After the call, Greg pulled me into a private Slack huddle. "No hello, no feedback sandwich. Just don't ever undermine me like that again." I said, "I didn't undermine you. I fixed the problem." Greg's voice dropped icy. "You embarrass me. You always need to be right." I stared at my screen, at the little green dot next to his name, and realized this wasn't about me being right. It was about him needing to be the center. From that point on, Greg started doing what insecure bosses do. He stopped inviting me to meetings that involved visibility. He started assigning me safe work, stuff that mattered but didn't get noticed. He began crediting my work as the team's effort in public while privately telling me I was difficult. When I asked for a path to management, he nodded thoughtfully and said, "Let's revisit in 6 months," like it was a carrot he could keep moving forever. I didn't rage quit. I didn't go scorched earth. I did what I've learned to do in workplaces where politics outweigh performance. I built leverage quietly. I started keeping receipts, not in a petty way, in a survival way. I saved emails where Greg delegated projects to me and then presented them as his. I kept the meeting notes where I flagged risks, and he dismissed them, then later blamed execution. I documented every process I owned. I built a folder of metrics showing the improvements my work made. Reduced ticket resolution time, decreased churn risk, faster onboarding. I asked for feedback in writing. I followed up verbal conversations with, just to recap, emails. It was exhausting, but it kept me sane because it created reality outside Greg's mood. I also started doing something else. I began building relationships above Greg without making it obvious. I'd send concise updates to the VP of Ops when an escalation was resolved. I'd ask the finance director clarifying questions that made her job easier. I'd help engineering untangle requirements without acting like I own them. I stayed useful. I stayed calm. I became a person people trusted. Greg noticed. He started calling me political like it was an insult. "You're always networking," he'd say, eyes narrow, as if relationships weren't literally how organizations function. 6 months after that late-night incident, I applied for an internal manager opening in another department. Greg found out and called me into his office. Glass walls, framed leadership principles poster, the whole theater. He leaned back and said, "You won't get it." I asked why. He smiled like he was explaining gravity. "They want someone who can inspire people," he said, "not someone who argues." I said, "I don't argue. I ask questions." Greg tapped his pen. "Same thing." That's when I understood the real issue. My questions made him feel exposed. I didn't get that manager role. Not because I wasn't qualified, because Greg killed it quietly. A culture fit concern here and not ready there. The feedback I got was vague enough to be unchallengeable. I went home that night and stared at my ceiling with that hot, humiliating feeling of being blocked by someone you can't confront without looking emotional. So I stopped asking Greg for permission. I took a leadership course on my own dime. I asked HR for mentorship programs and got paired with Marisol, the chief revenue officer, sharp, blunt, the kind of executive who doesn't waste time on nonsense. In our first meeting, she asked, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want to lead a team, and my boss keeps telling me I'm not manager material." Marisol raised an eyebrow. "Why?" she asked. I told her the truth. "I'm direct. I push for clarity. I don't play the game." Marisol nodded once. "Good," she said. "Now prove you can do it without asking for the title." So I did. When a cross-functional project needed someone to coordinate between ops, sales, and engineering, I volunteered. When our internal tools were falling apart and people were wasting hours on manual workarounds, I built a lightweight system and trained everyone on it. When 2 new hires were drowning, I became their unofficial mentor. I stopped waiting to be recognized and started acting like a leader because the work needed it. The more I did, the more Greg tightened his grip. He started nitpicking my tone in emails. He told me to smile more in meetings, which I still can't believe a grown man said to me in 2025. He began assigning me impossible deadlines and then acting concerned when I pushed back. "Are you overwhelmed?" Like he was worried about my mental health instead of engineering my failure. Then the company got hit. It started with a rumor that one of our biggest customers was exploring competitors. Then we lost them. Then another client froze expansion. Revenue dipped. The board got nervous. The CEO, Daryl, founder type, charismatic, chronically allergic to bad news, kept insisting it was temporary. He did town halls with buzzwords and applause lines while teams quietly burned out trying to plug holes with overtime. In the middle of this, Greg made the mistake that ultimately ended him. He lied upward. A client escalation hit my queue. Major, urgent. A shipment error caused a regulatory breach for a pharmaceutical customer. Not life-threatening, but serious enough that legal was involved. I flagged it immediately and emailed Greg, legal, and our VP of Ops with a clear summary and next steps. Greg replied all with, handled, and then did nothing. For 2 days. I found out because the customer emailed me directly. We have not received your remediation plan. My stomach dropped. I forwarded it to Greg. No reply. So I did what I always do. I fixed it. I pulled the right people into a call, got legal to draft the language, got engineering to implement the patch, got ops to adjust the process. We delivered the remediation plan within 6 hours. The customer calmed down. 2 days later, Daryl asked Greg in a leadership meeting, "Why wasn't I informed earlier?" Greg said, "My team didn't escalate it. I wasn't in that meeting, but Marisol was, and she texted me one sentence. Did you escalate the pharma incident?" I stared at my phone, heart pounding, then replied with receipts, screenshot of my email timestamped, my follow-ups, the customer message. Marisol replied, "Keep everything. Don't say anything yet." A week after that, Daryl stepped down abruptly. The official line was health and family. The unofficial line, whispered in hallways, was board pressure and poor numbers. The board appointed an interim CO, Marisol. When Marisol took over, the company changed in ways you could feel in the air. Meetings got shorter. Decisions got clearer. Performative optimism got replaced with show me the data. People stopped pretending everything was fine and started actually solving problems. Marisol called me into her office 3 days into her interim role. Not to congratulate me, not to gossip. She slid a printed org chart across her desk and said, "I'm restructuring ops. I want you running the transformation program." I blinked. Like, as a project lead? Marisol stared at me like I was being slow on purpose. "As a director," she said, "you'll have a team." My hands went cold. "I manage Greg. Greg will report into you for now," she said flat. I swear my brain short-circuited. "He won't accept that," I said before I could stop myself. Marisol's mouth twitched. "That's his problem," she said. "Can you do the job?" I swallowed. "Yes." "Good," she said. "Start tomorrow." That's how it began. Not with revenge. With responsibility. With a title I'd had to claw my way toward while Greg tried to block me. The first time Greg had to sit in my status meeting, I thought he might actually combust. He arrived early, sat rigid, opened his laptop like a shield. When I walked in, he did that tight smile and said, "Well, look at you." I sat down, opened my notes, and said, "Let's start." The room got quiet. Greg waited for me to flinch, to gloat, to do something emotional so he could label me difficult again. I didn't. I just ran the meeting. Clear agenda, clear owners, clear deadlines. People left feeling relieved, which honestly is the highest compliment in corporate life. Greg started trying to undermine me immediately. He'd forget to send updates. He'd privately tell people not to take my processes seriously. He'd CC executives on minor issues to create noise. I responded the same way every time. Calm, documented, direct. Per our last agreement, as noted in the meeting, here's the timeline. Marisol watched. Not in a dramatic, "I'm testing you" way. In a practical way. She'd ask me for weekly summaries, and I'd give them, concise, factual, with receipts. I didn't complain about Greg emotionally. I described behaviors and impacts. I suggested solutions. I treated it like a business problem because it was. 6 months later, Marisol was officially named CEO. The board loved her because the numbers stabilized. Employees loved her because the chaos decreased. Clients loved her because she told the truth. And because Marisol is Marisol, she didn't just keep the lights on. She started making bets. One of those bets was acquiring a smaller competitor to expand our platform. It was messy, expensive, and required internal alignment that Harrogate had never been good at. Marisol formed a small exec task force to run the acquisition integration. She picked me. That's where the 2 years later I'm CEO part stops sounding like a fantasy and starts sounding like a weird corporate accident. Because I didn't become CEO by manifesting it. I became CEO because Marisol got offered a bigger role. Board chair of a parent company. After the acquisition closed, and she wanted someone who could run Harrogate without ego, without theater, and without lying to make herself look good. She didn't want another Daryl. She didn't want another Greg. So one Thursday morning, she called me in her office and said, "I'm moving upstairs. I want you in this seat." I thought she was joking. I actually laughed once, nervously. "No," I said. "Come on." Marisol didn't smile. "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm telling you what I'm recommending to the board." My mouth went dry. "Why me?" Marisol leaned back and said, "Because you do the work. Because you don't need to be liked. Because you don't lie to make yourself feel powerful." She paused, then added, "And because I've seen you handle people who try to sabotage you without becoming them." I sat there feeling like my lungs forgot how to function. "Okay," I said finally, voice small. "Okay, if the board agrees, I'll do it." They did. The announcement happened on a Monday. HR sent out the email, and my name, my actual name, sat next to the words Chief Executive Officer. I stared at it for a long time in my inbox like it might rearrange itself into a prank. Then my phone started ringing. People congratulated me. People asked for meetings. People asked what would change. I answered what I could, took notes on what I couldn't, and tried not to throw up from adrenaline. And then, at 6:42 p.m., Greg emailed me. Subject: quick chat. 2 lines. Congratulations. Would love to meet briefly about my role moving forward. My stomach flipped because I knew exactly what my role moving forward meant. Greg had finally realized the ground had shifted under him. The next morning, I walked into the same conference room where Greg had once told me I'd never make manager. Same burnt coffee smell. Same HVAC clicking. But this time, my badge opened the executive floor door. My calendar owned the room. Greg was already there, sitting 2 straight, hands folded like he was waiting for a judge. He looked different. Not older, exactly, smaller. Like confidence had been draining out of him since Marisol took over, and now it was almost empty. I sat down across from him. "Morning," I said. Greg forced a smile. "Morning," he echoed, then cleared his throat. "First of all, congratulations. Really, I always knew you'd go far." I didn't react. I let the silence do the work. Greg swallowed. "I want to talk about where I fit," he said, voice careful. "I've been at Harrogate a long time. I've built." "You've been here 9 years," I said, checking my notes, because I'd learned not to let him inflate history. "Yes." Greg's eyes flickered. "I just want to make sure there's a place for me," he continued. "With the restructuring and—" "Greg," I said calm, "why are you really here?" His jaw tightened. He looked down at the table, then back up. "I heard there might be changes," he said slowly, "and I'd like to keep my job." There it was. Not pride, not leadership, just fear. I didn't feel triumph the way you'd think. I felt tired and weirdly sad because I remembered the younger version of him. Maybe before he became someone who protected his ego by crushing other people. Maybe he'd always been that way. Maybe this was just the first time it didn't work. I opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "Here's what's happening," I said. "We're merging your function into the transformation org. Your role as director of operations is being eliminated." Greg's face went pale. "Eliminated?" he repeated, like the word was in another language. "Yes," I said. He leaned forward, voice rushing now. "But I can adapt. I can take a different role. I'm flexible. I can report to me." I offered gently and watched him flinch. Greg swallowed hard. "Yes," he said, barely audible. I looked at him for a long second, then said, "I'm willing to consider keeping you if you can do 3 things. Greg's eyes widened. "Anything," he said too fast. I held up one finger. 1, you stop undermining people. If I hear you taking credit for your team's work again, you're out. Greg nodded quickly. 2, I continued, you communicate truthfully upward. No more handled emails when nothing is handled. No more blaming your team. If something is late, You own it. His throat bobbed. Okay, he said. 3. I said, you acknowledge in writing that you blocked internal promotions using vague culture language, and you agree to a performance plan with specific behaviors. Greg blinked. His voice cracked slightly. That's serious. It is, I said. Greg's eyes darted around the room like he wanted an exit that wasn't the door. If I sign that, he said carefully, it makes me look bad. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I just said, Greg, you made you look bad. Silence. He stared at the document. His hand shook slightly when he picked it up. And if I don't? He asked, quieter. Then we proceed with severance and transition, I said. Professionally. Greg's jaw tightened. This is because you hate me, he said suddenly, like he couldn't help it, like he needed to make it personal so he could understand it. I looked at him and felt something settle in me, clean, firm. This is because of how you led, I said. Or didn't. Greg's face twisted. For a second I thought he'd lash out. Then his shoulders slumped like a puppet whose strings got cut. I was trying to protect the team, he muttered, not convincing even himself. You were trying to protect you, I corrected, softly. Greg's eyes went wet, and that almost threw me because I'd never seen him close to vulnerable. He cleared his throat hard. I don't know how to, he started, then stopped. His pride wouldn't let him finish. I waited. Finally, he whispered, Can I have a data review? Yes, I said. You have until tomorrow at noon. He stood up slowly, like gravity had doubled. At the door, he hesitated and said, without looking at me, I shouldn't have said that. What? I asked. You'll never make manager, he murmured. His voice sounded like sandpaper. I shouldn't have said it. I didn't get the satisfaction rush you'd expect. It didn't erase anything. But it did confirm what I'd always known. It was never about my ability. It was about his fear. Noted, I said quietly. Greg left. The next day he signed. He kept his job, different title, smaller scope, heavy oversight, no more hiding. Some people might say I should have fired him immediately, made an example. Maybe they're right. But the truth is companies are messy. People are messy. And I didn't want my first big CEO moment to be about revenge. I wanted it to be about standards. He lasted 4 months before he slipped back into old habits and tried to scapegoat someone under him. This time, there were no blind spots above him. HR had the performance plan. I had the receipts. We exited him cleanly. No screaming. No public humiliation. Just consequences. And that's what I wish I could tell anyone stuck under Greg. Sometimes the win isn't a viral moment where your boss grovels in front of everyone. Sometimes the win is quieter. It's building a life and a reputation that doesn't rely on their permission. It's refusing to become small so they can feel big. It's learning to document your reality so nobody can rewrite it later. 2 years ago, Greg told me I'd never make manager. He said it like it was a fact he could stamp onto me. Turns out he was just describing the ceiling of his imagination. And I didn't need to argue with him to prove him wrong. I just needed to keep going long enough for the room to change, long enough for the truth to have somewhere to land.